on this last week. Thank you, Santa. So over here, this was Ghazali's closing statement on some of these ideas about taking leadership position or taking positions where an individual has power. What is he supposed to do, and how do you kind of decide on whether you should do that as such? So over here, he talks about how the dunya can really pull somebody away, right? How can it can really distract us. And it can distract us so badly and so much that when we stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we can actually be embarrassed of the things that we did and embarrassed of the deeds that we performed in this world. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us. And he mentions this as a reminder for us that every time we engage in something and we engage in an action, we engage in a deed, we engage in interaction with someone, remember, right? Remember at the end of the day is that we will be resurrected, we will be standing in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we'll be held accountable for all the things that we did. He mentions Hadith al-Muhasibi, he narrated this hadith in some of his books, then commented, these are the scholars of evil, the demons among humans, a trial for people. They sought the presentation and elevation of worldly affairs over the hereafter, humiliated religion for the sake of the world. In the worldly life, they are disgraceful and vile, and in the hereafter, they are the most wretched. And we had touched on this before, but why is it that the scholars and the qadis and the person who gave generously, the mujahid, why are they held to, why are they punished so harshly? Right, so if a person knows, what is his excuse? Right? Like he doesn't have any excuse. What else? Right, they have a responsibility. Like when you have that knowledge, you have that responsibility, right? And when you're given that responsibility, the accountability that comes with that is significantly higher. What else? Do I have to do this? Do I have to become a scholar? Right, you chose, like this is the path that you chose. Like nobody forced you to do this. And so the question here is, right, like some of the things that you guys had mentioned is very important. And this probably ties into, maybe some of you are familiar, some of you are not. Like there's a very famous da'i, he was caught being sexually explicit with a minor. Those are the accusations, right? Whether they're true or not has yet to be seen in court. But I'm very interested, not so much in what he did, because if he did that, I hope he's punished fully, and the rights of that minor are returned, even though they can't be, right? Because they've been violated in such a way. But I'm interested in the response. And there are people who are on full attack mode. Why is the response so emotional?
Because they had a higher trust in them.
Right. When trust gets broken, what happens? People are hurt, right? People feel betrayed. And which group of people do we want to trust the most? We want to trust scholars. Like we want to trust them. Right? Like we want to trust these people who are representative of the religion. And the problem, what happens is like, okay, we want to trust those people. And in our hearts, in our eyes, what happens with those people? What kind of status do we start putting them at? We start elevating them, right? Like we start putting them above what they are. Because it's not only that these people are representative of the religion. Many times when we look at them, we're like, they are the religion. So anytime a person like that falls...
Is it a misconception among people?
Of course.
Like, not just the reason I'm saying is he's a human being too.
Obviously.
And, there's another a story. I remember he prayed like 500 years, but at the end he still kind of shut down.
It's true. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, he might be a higher scholar, but it's just he's a human.
He's a human being, right? There's no doubt about that. He's definitely a human being.
My problem is the general public actually, like you said, making him the religion instead of actually seeing the religion.
Absolutely. It-
Just
and,
a regulation.
and not just that, who did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala command us to take as an example? The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Why?
Because he's Azim.
Can our trust in him ever be broken? Absolutely not. So this is why he Azza wa Jal, he said, okay, you want to take an example. You want somebody who embodies the religion. You want somebody who's representative of the religion. You want somebody who is the walking, talking religion. Then take the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There's no reason for you to take anybody else. But it's very natural when we're dealing with a living, breathing person. What gets involved? Emotions. And when emotions become involved, it's very difficult now to start prying those things away. So what happens is you have all these people who are very hurt, very upset, openly attacking, right? Openly going after, name calling, all of these things. And then you have another group of people who be like, oh, okay, well, no, we need to wait. Like, we need to wait and see what happens with this case. These people are getting mad at those people. And these people are getting mad at these people. So where should we stand? And what should we do? Like, is number one, I guess the question is the emotion justified? Yes. No, the emotion is justified. Because remember, the accountability lies where? Not in what we feel, but in what we do. Right? So how I channel those emotions and how I express them, that's where the accountability is going to come. And when trust is broken, very natural for us to get hurt. Right? That's a very natural response. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But how I respond to that is, okay.
Problematic.
This is where it becomes a problem. So I have a few layered questions here, and this is something I think is a very good discussion point. It's unfortunate that we have to discuss it in this light, but I will say, Tayyib, we had talked about some of these things before. What can a scholar do? What are some I would say efforts and efforts or steps that he can take to protect himself?
Yeah, you gave an example. There was an example last time when someone walked in who was reading Quran, you stopped it. Just so they wouldn't think, oh,
right.
maybe that wrong was
So never give a false pretense.
false pretense.
Never create a false pretense that I am super pious or I am super religious. Always try to be who I am, right? Always try to present my authentic self. Okay, what else? What are some other fail-safes I can put in?
One of them would be, since you are actually in public eye,
Mm-hmm.
you should present yourself and try to avoid as much as possible those kind of problematic, I guess.
Sure, how do I do that?
Just by being human and vulnerable, because I think a lot of times people in like leadership positions, they put up this persona image as though they're indestructible and perfect.
So how does a person in such a position be vulnerable?
You admit to what you've done.
All right, so if you did something wrong, right, admitting it, sure. Before it gets there, though. Like, let's take it a step back before it gets there.
I think you don't need to put yourself in a leadership position if you feel like you're engaging in behaviors that are problematic and that
Okay.
would create a rift in your relationship to the community. Like, leadership is optional.
So usually what happens is a person, either they're overconfident, right? And then they step into that position. Now they realize, like, okay, this is a problem. What should they do?
Step back.
We'll get back to you. Ideally, they should step down. The problem with most people is that when they step into such positions, what is associated with it? Power, fame, and wealth, right? So now I've maintained and I've created this lifestyle for myself. Is it easy to walk away from that? Naturally, it's very hard. What should have happened is those red flags. I should have seen them when I was taking those smaller positions, like, oh man, you know what? When I'm given a little bit of power, I exert it. But that a person should have removed themselves at that point before they went so far, right? The shura, I want to expand on that. Seeking counsel. Okay. So how can a person in such a position seek counsel? What should they do?
Going back to the community leaders.
Okay, so that person should create
A circle.
a circle of other community leaders, and what should he do in those circles? Whoops.
Ask for guidance.
Okay.
Regularly,
Uh-huh.
seeking, guidance, keep an open line with them.
Right, keeping an open line with such people. And what are some things, or what are some conversations that could happen in those spaces?
Like, they should be very much open.
Okay, very open,
No boundaries at all.
no boundaries at all.
Yeah.
Okay,
Since this is the closest circle that you can get to
yeah,
keep you standing.
sure.
A report of his role, what he's been doing.
Okay, transparency. So transparency is important, and there are levels to transparency. There's transparency with the community, right? These are, what have I done? What are some of the programs that I started? What are some of the things that I initiated? That is important so the community knows where their money's going and where the time is going, right? They're like, okay, yeah, you know what? He's doing a good job, and it helps the community judge on whether we should keep this person in this position or not. And within that group of peers, he wants to be transparent about where he is at personally. Can you share that stuff with the community? Not always, right? And part of the reason is if a person doesn't share that position, it'll become a lot more difficult for them to process and understand when I share with them. Does that make sense? So if you have an issue, so let's say that this scholar has an attraction issue. So what would he say now to this circle of peers?
How do you guys deal with this?
Right. I think I have a problem. I think I have a problem. How do I deal with this? This is my problem. This is my issue.
Seeking counsel, I guess.
Huh?
Seeking counsel.
That's exactly what you're doing, right? You're seeking counsel from people who might face similar problems and similar issues. I have a very close friend, public speaker. He had a student, female student, who had studied with him for a few years, and she sent him inappropriate pictures of herself. Out of the blue. He had no idea. And had he not told me this, I would never know the amount of pressure that some of these people in these positions are in, and the amount of fitna that they're exposed to. Because I would assume, right, you know how we assume about scholars and clergy that they're righteous? What do we assume about the people who are coming and listening to them? We assume the same thing. So when we hear like out-of-pocket stuff like this, all of a sudden, how does it help us as a community? It actually helps bring perspective. So being transparent with the community, with the accomplishments and the things and the work that I'm doing, whether that be good or bad, right? So I feel I've done this well, these are some of the things that I've maintained, and these are some of the things that we need to work on in the coming year, right? That should be like an annual report type thing. That's something that's very important. I have that circle of peers, right, that I discuss with, that I have personal problems or personal challenges with. Because there might be certain things like, hey, listen, I have a client, I think I'm starting to become attracted to her, can I pass her on to you? Right, can I refer her to you? That's real. And is there anything wrong with that?
No.
No, but saying that, it requires,
Quite.
right, it requires some humility, right? It requires some humility. It requires like, a sense of self-awareness, like, man, I have this problem. I can't deal with this. If I keep doing this, what's going to happen?
You're gonna follow?
I'm going to have a problem. I'm going to have a problem. So remember, we're trying to create fail-safes, and we're trying to create steps so that this scholar protects himself. You have to put barriers. What about the community? Does the community have a responsibility as well? Yes, they do. Everyone has a responsibility. Very famous speaker, very well known. I'm sure all of you know him. I don't feel the need to take his name. Women would dress up to come to his classes, completely decked out. They would go try to get his signature. They would go up to him, ask private questions. Is there a sense of responsibility that's there?
No.
Yes or no? No, there should be. There isn't.
There isn't.
There
but
isn't.
should be, yeah.
Tayyib, how do we create that?
More talking about that topic.
Okay, this is something that needs to be brought up. Bringing awareness.
Yeah.
Like, hey, listen, this is not okay. This is a problem. Is there anything wrong with women learning from male teachers?
No.
No, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. The Prophet ﷺ used to teach women. He used to set aside a day specifically where he would teach and deal with women. So there's nothing wrong with that. Tayyib. But what are some of the reminders that need to happen in those spaces? Be very strict, right? Very strict in dealings. Very strict in how the interactions are going. Making sure, like, does that mean that, a scholar can't make jokes? Does it have to be like robotic? No, that's not necessary, right? That's not how it's supposed to be either. There can be a very organic type of relationship that happens there between a teacher and a student, but there have to be strict guidelines and strict policies. Tayyib, what are some of the things that would not be acceptable for the individual? So if I'm going to a class, what are some guidelines that I could follow?
You should have a person should have his own gauge inside that kind of knows he's flirting.
Man, I need to have my own self-awareness, right? I need to be aware. Why am I going to this class? Am I going because I'm going to learn something, or am I going because he's cute? Right? These are real questions we need to ask ourselves. Because the burden of responsibility, it falls on both, right? It's not falling on, remember, it's not falling on one person. So that person needs to have that self-awareness. What else? Yes?
I have a question.
Sure.
And yeah, my question kind of goes back to the original example that you gave. Primarily because I'm also familiar with this situation because it happened in my community.
Yeah. That's unfortunate. I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, it is unfortunate. But my question is, like, in that situation, right, because I also don't want to conflate the examples that you
Sure.
just gave with, like, attraction between two adults versus a situation where, it's with a minor, where it's
Sure.
different, there's no consent, all of
Yeah.
that kind of stuff involved. In that situation, like, you do bring in, other community leaders, you do the accountability and all of that.
No, you bring in the authorities.
Yeah, you bring in the
Yeah,
authorities, let's say like other scholars, other religious leaders, and I think like in my community, a lot of the upsetness with that specific situation has less to do with what this person.
Yeah, and more the response.
It's more,
Yeah.
it has more to do with like, because people do things like that,
Sure.
unfortunately, all the time. But
Yeah.
like, a lot of the upsetness has been with other religious leaders in the community and how they continue to give this person a platform
Sure.
despite,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
actions that they've been convicted of and, in the court of law. So I guess kind of how do you handle a situation like that once you've brought in other
Sure.
community leaders who are also not taking accountability in the way that the community feels is appropriate?
Sure. So the community needs to have a meeting, right? So a town hall, and be like, how are we going to deal with this situation? Right? Because you still have leaders in the community. Sometimes you'll have the chair of the board, right? Okay, like he's taken responsibility in being representative of the community when the religious leader has failed. So he'll step in and be like, okay, how do we bring accountability to this person? You have a discussion. Be like, okay, he will no longer be invited here. He will no longer allowed to teach in this blah, blah, blah. Because at the end of the day, the community's priority is to protect who? The community. And what can happen is, okay, we've come up with all these things. You have a discussion amongst people who are learned, people who you trust, and be like, are these guidelines reasonable? After those guidelines are come up, what do I do with those guidelines? I enforce them, and I also make them not applicable. I make them public. Oh, you said public. I'm sorry. You make them public. Because anybody who asks, say, hey, listen, why don't you guys invite so-and-so? Refer to the website and refer to the statement that the board has made. Because now anything you've done, and do any of the surrounding communities now have an excuse? No. Now, whether they choose to or not, that's their prerogative. Because at the end of the day, if my community's responsibility is to defend and protect my community, can I be responsible for everyone else? It's not even realistic. Not just that. Even if you have an individual who commits a violation, and let's say that violation is sexual in nature. Let's say it's inappropriate. This person now, what should happen to this person? They should be held accountable, sure. What does accountability look like? Accountability can look like jail time. Accountability can look like fines. Accountability can look like paying for recompense for whatever type of emotional damage was caused. All of that is done. Now what do we do with this person? This person has served their time, like, okay, there's a minimum government sentence, that person has served that sentence, that person has paid that fine. What do we do with this person? Because they're human beings, right?
I mean, they can continue to be a part of the community, but like,
But
they don't have to hold a leadership.
Thank you.
That's optional.
not just that, you would not put them in any type of position that would give them that kind of access that they had before.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So just because this person was a Quran teacher, or this person was an Imam, or this person was a scholar, it does not mean that this person can now not be an electrician. Right? It does not mean that this person cannot now be a plumber. Because this person made a mistake, and he was wrong, and he took people's rights. No doubt about that. Reprehensible. But once the person has fulfilled the requirements of reformation, is it fair to consistently and continuously punish this individual? No, it doesn't. Because what is the goal for every single person?
Every single person.
Yes, all of us, is reformation. Right? The goal is Islah. The goal is to come back to the truth. And does it matter how far I strayed? In this situation, this person took the right of one person, maybe two people. Like, what about the man who took the right of 100 when he killed every single one of them? Was he not given a path back to reformation, into Islah, into recompense, into Tawbah? Like, we have to create those pathways. Now, does that pathway, again, do we learn? Absolutely, 100%. And part of that reconciliation, and part of that Tawbah, is we will never put you in a position again, never again, where you will have the same type of access that you did before, period.
But that doesn't mean you're punishing them.
No. Because if a person has, so
I'm actually helping you.
I'm helping him, I'm preventing him, right? Because before, okay, you know the barriers we had, they weren't strong enough. So what do we have to do now? We have to put up stronger barriers.
You're doing him a favor.
We're doing him a favor. Here in the United States, I know a lot of, like, I won't say a lot, but there might be some people who disagree with it. The sex offender list, how long can you stay on it?
10 years?
You stay, for some people it's even longer, or until you go to Israel and be protected. But like, so the thing is like, you have these things in place so that who is protected, so that people are protected, so the community is protected. Right? So you need to put those barriers in place. So this is the responsibility of the individual. This is the responsibility of the community member, but we're not done. The community, what else does this community member need to do? Remember how the scholar had to seek counsel in shura? Okay, what about this person? Do they need to do that too? The community member. Yeah. She feels attracted to the speaker. She feels attracted to the. What should she do?
An adult, yes, they should
Right.
also seek counsel.
Absolutely. Even not an adult, even a person who's younger, right? Even a minor. What should they do? They need to go and talk to someone, because what's going to happen with that child now? Or that child, oh, you know what? Somebody who's 16, 17 years old, right? They're getting very close to adulthood. What do we do with that child? What do we do with that person? What do we do with that older minor? Say, hey, listen, you can't go to his classes anymore. Why? Because he's not the only one who's giving knowledge. Right? Knowledge is anybody can give it. And he doesn't have anything that another person doesn't. Like, again, remember, the idea is what? Creating barriers to prevent us from falling into these situations. Okay, what if I'm someone who has fleeting attraction, right? So I watch news, right? I see a news anchor, I find her attractive. Is that attraction something that is continuous, or is it maybe just in the initial moment when I see her? Right? It's usually fleeting, right? You know, that type of attraction is usually fleeting. What is the type of attraction that is problematic?
People you regularly come across.
So that's part of it. So if I keep coming across this person, right? Because sometimes the attraction of convenience is a real thing. Right? Like you're constantly around someone, you start becoming comfortable with that person, and all of a sudden it's like, man, this person is like actually a really great person. Right? And your heart starts becoming attached.
You like growing up?
That's not from
Huh? It's very natural.
normal.
It's very normal. It's very natural, right? Even people who get married, do they get married from, like, you know what I mean, like someone who they don't know, or is it usually within their proximity? Right? It's usually within their proximity. It's very common. So the type of attraction, usually someone either with a regular interaction, or the attraction is so strong that it forces me to engage. Like I constantly want to engage. Right? These are the things that we need to have that awareness of. And what do? I express that with my circle, right? I need to have that, this close, like people misunderstand and they don't appreciate the appropriateness and the importance of having a good circle of friends. These are people who we have to discuss and be like, you know, oh man, I saw so-and-so, or like so-and-so's really trying. It's like, okay, bro, you need to stay away from that. Like, no, you need to mind your business. Okay, no, this is not appropriate at all. This shouldn't happen. Because they're the ones who help keep us in check, right? These are the type of people that we need to be around. It's like, hey man, I ran into so-and-so again. Then stop walking down that corridor.
Go around.
you find another way to work. It's like, oh man, well, we take the same train, but go sit in a different car. Like, take a different train. I don't care. Uber. You know what I mean? Like, learn. Like this is what friendship is, right? This is what friendship is. So we talked about the scholar. We talked about the individual. What is the role of the institution? Absolutely.
Because I'm part of that and I just cannot, I don't think it's right.
Private classes should not happen. With mixed gender? Absolutely not. Private classes should not happen, right? In smaller classes, I'm still okay with, right? Because you still have a group of people, but like one-on-one attention, no.
Even if it's Quran.
No. This guy was a Quran teacher.
Yes.
Especially if it's the Quran. Oh man, that one stung, man. What else?
And I think Prophet Muhammad
So.
mentioned something, like something happened between a male and female, and they said, oh well, but that's a Quran class, and he said even if the guy was teaching the girl Quran,
Yeah.
it should never happen.
SubhanAllah. I'm not familiar with the story, but yeah, he sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that when a man and a woman are alone, the third is the shaitan. Right, this is something that's very clear. All right, so what are some other barriers or what are some other fail-safes that institutions can put into place? Keeping a record, right? Keeping a record. Who's coming in, who's coming out, how many people you're seeing. Are there acceptable situations for a man and a woman to be, I don't want to say they're not secluded, right? Alone, but not secluded. Everybody can still see. That's okay. You might not be able to hear everything that they said, and part of the reason I say this is when, you guys know the story of Dhihar? So where the man, he said about his wife, like, you're like my mother's back, meaning that I'm never going to be intimate with you, but I'm going to keep you as my wife. You guys know the story? So the woman's name was Khawda. She came to the Prophet ﷺ to complain. Like, my husband did this and he said this. Aisha radiallahu anha, she was there. She was like, but I couldn't hear them. I could only hear like bits and pieces. Meaning that as long as two people are not secluded, even if what they're saying cannot be completely heard, then that is allowed. So record keeping is something that's important. Why? Because the people who that person is speaking to, you'll know who it is. Yes?
I think Prophet at night, he
Yeah.
was walking with one of his wives and took up down and saw him and
Yep.
said, hey, so-and-so, stop, this is my wife, such and
Yeah,
such.
yeah.
We trust your wife, say that.
Yes, I don't want the shaitan to place something in your hearts. Right? Being public. Being very public. Right? This is one of the easiest, most important ways that a person can protect themselves. That any conversation that happens, any interaction that happens, and if you are a public figure, make sure that you're doing and making those interactions where? In public. Because you remove any shubha, you remove any doubts.
But they're cameras everywhere.
Huh? Oh, yeah, I mean, so, yeah, I mean, sure. It's unfortunate, right? Like in some situations, Allah Mustaan. But I'm saying, like, these are things that the institution needs to do. They also need to check in with their employees, right? They need to check in with the people who are engaged with them. Hey, is everything okay? What's going on? Is there anything we need to know about? what is happening with the institutions today?
They don't have that level
They
of
don't.
organization.
They don't. You know what happens with many of these institutions? Including Al-Maghrib. And Al-Maghrib, I will say this, the number of people that have started practicing Islam through Al-Maghrib, amazing. You know, may Allah bless them in their work. But when it comes to their teachers, they have failed miserably. They have basically given all their teachers free reign. They have in their policies that a teacher may not have a intimate relationship with a student. Like, this is just a policy. But in terms of like regular check-ins and things like that, it is free reign. And why do they give them free reign?
Because they need teachers.
They need teachers, that's one. What is the second? They bring them clout. Right? The more they allow these du'at and these speakers to be more, I would say, like presentative, it's the bigger audience they get. And who benefits? The institution. It's a very toxic relationship. It's like, well, we need more people, we need to be more popular. Okay, this person is getting more popular, blah, blah. So what do you not do with such a person?
Not bother.
You don't rein them in, right? It's like, oh, his trajectory is skyrocketing, so what are we going to do with the rocket? We're going to keep it like going. And we're not going to rein it in. And some of the things that I was very upset about in terms of like some of these responses was the fact that it's unfortunate that we weren't able to help him by putting more fail-safes in place. And we will do an internal audit to make sure that this doesn't happen with other teachers and other students. I would have really respected that. But it's easier to what? This person, and like I said, people are a whole, and I'm not saying this, and please, I don't want anyone to misquote me or misunderstand me in this. It's like, yes, reprehensible, horrible, no doubt. This person also helped like 25,000 people read the Quran.
That's why I said the community failed too.
No, I'm saying this is a fail. This is all around failure, right? It's the biggest failure is from him, no doubt, right? Because he's the one. He's an adult. He knew exactly what he was doing. But there's failures from the community. There's failures from the institutions, right? There's a layered failure that's there, and there has to be accountability all around, no doubt. Like if he did it, should he be punished? Absolutely, to the full extent of the law. I don't doubt that for a moment. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us, our families, our daughters especially, I mean, like reprehensible, unacceptable. But we cannot summarize a person into an instance. That's not how Allah deals with us, and we shouldn't deal with them. And this is why I was talking about, I was like, okay, yes, we don't put them in the same capacity. We don't give them the same access. That's ridiculous. That's silly. But there has to be closer accountability within these institutions. There has to be closer accountability within the communities. Like even myself as a father, like if I see my daughter getting all dressed up, where are you going? Wait, what's going on? Oh, I'm going to so-and-so's lecture. It's like, oh, that sounds great. Who's so-and-so? Can you show me a picture? I would go too. Like, no, that's not happening. We'll sit down and we're going to watch the lecture. You invite your friends over after, no problem. I'll teach you. Right? Like, again, that sense of there has to be community responsibility, and it has to be across the board. It can't just, I think it's very easy to witch hunt. I think it's very easy to fall into the mob. I think it's very easy to, to sling mud at others. But it becomes very difficult when it actually comes down to this reality of taking responsibility for mistakes. And the reality, like everybody in each one of these steps is human. So the possibility of error exists. People will make mistakes. People will err. Our job is to minimize it because we can't remove it, right? That's the reality. We cannot remove it. But come on, like you're telling me we can't do better? Like, we very easily can. I've had other imams who I'm friends with, and they would tell me, they're like, hey, listen, I'm giving you a referral. Like, why? What's up? It's like, dude, I can't. I'm telling you I can't. Like, this woman is a fitna for me. Like, please, you take care of it. Okay. And just because a woman is fitna for a particular man, does that mean that she's a fitna for everyone? No, not necessarily, right? Every interaction and every dealing and every relationship is unique. right? Not every single one needs to lead to that. All we have to do is make sure that we're putting the protective measures in place to make sure that the scholar is protected, to make sure that the community member is protected, to make sure the community is protected, to make sure the institution is protected. Right? Everybody deserves that. There's no doubt about it. And a lot of it, subhanAllah, if it really boils down, it just boils down to transparency and honesty. Like being honest with ourselves, being honest with others, being transparent, right? That's the simplest, easiest way for kind of everyone to be protected in this whole process. But
And it's
yeah.
good that they're taking these measures to protect themselves and the other side as well.
Absolutely. I mean, this is only khair, right? There's only good in this. But if I'm like, oh, he went to jail, oh, we didn't know about this, we fired him, and we're going to offer therapy for anybody who's dealing with this difficulty. It's so, you know what I mean? It's so easy to dismiss people. And I think the chances of him being venerated are very little now, right? Like as more and more information comes out, there's very little chance of him actually being exonerated from the things that he did. But I will say this, if he was, none of these institutions, none of these individuals would apologize. And I've seen it with other people. I've seen it with other speakers. It's like, oh, he was doing this and that and blah, 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 and this. And then what happens in the end, it's a big nothing burger. Maybe he did some stuff that was inappropriate, but nothing that violated anybody's rights. Nothing that hurt anybody. And then when it all comes out, these individuals and these institutions, what do? They don't even apologize. Act like nothing happened. And this person's life is ruined. Like they can never speak again. They can never go and join the public circuit. But it's tough, man. Like this position is not supposed to be for everyone. It's one that a person should be very wary before they enter it. I'm sorry, you were going to say something?
I was going to say the example you gave of if an institution were to come and say, we've held this person accountable, whatever, we're offering resources.
Yeah.
I think even that step itself is a step that we don't reach often.
No, that's true.
That's the first step, and then after that, the Reformation comes
Yeah.
into play. But even that first step, it doesn't happen. In the example that we've been discussing today, I think people's frustration is that we haven't even reached that point. We haven't even reached the point of people admitting, that something happened or that it was inappropriate.
Yeah.
People are defending the action if it did happen.
A lot
you
of
know
time.
what I'm saying? So
No, I'm saying
I think a lot of
it's
the
undefendable.
examples are very idealistic. Ideally, in a perfect world, we'd be taking all of these measures, but I think unfortunately, the reality is that and at least I'm only speaking from my personal experiences, of course, but oftentimes the example you're giving now, it still doesn't end up happening of other religious leaders holding each other accountable or being transparent and being honest and all of these things. And I think that's really where people's frustration comes from.
Which is understandable, but at the end of the day, so what do? We still have to hold ourselves to a standard, regardless of what other people are doing or what they're not doing. And at the end of the day, it's okay, well, no, we have a good model here, right? We have the model of the Prophet ﷺ. What barriers were put in place? Did bad things happen during the time of the Prophet ﷺ in front of him? Yes, they did, right? There are people who came forward and said, I committed zina, meaning that zina was happening. There are people who would come drunk to the masjid. There are people, you know what I mean? So it's not oh, bad things didn't happen. We shouldn't have this romantic idea of bad things didn't happen during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. They did. And if we understand that these things did happen and they were bad things that happened, okay, well, what are the steps that we can do to minimize them? And all of these are very practical, implementable steps. And I'm saying, at least from my perspective, these are the things that I do. Walillah alhamd, I try to be transparent. Any meetings I have with any clients will be on premises. It will be in the office and everybody knows. My calendar is available, not to the public, but it's available to the executive director and the secretary. So everybody knows who's coming to meet me. These things, they have to be. Because this is the only way I can protect myself. What if a woman comes in one day and she's like, oh, he said this or he did that? Or the opposite. Or I could say, oh, she did this or she tried doing that. Right? It can go both ways. There has to be transparency. That's the only way everybody feels protected. It's the only way we can gain trust.
Question. You just mentioned like this. Maybe I don't attend that meeting, but usually like they pictured everything is perfect in the past.
Yeah.
They don't bring out those scenarios like just like you said. Oh, they committed something.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Maybe if they were to bring those and how they dealt with that time, or
Absolutely.
something like that,
Yeah.
would make
I mean,
more. Because right now, like what I see is everywhere you go, it's like picture perfect.
Yeah. And it's not. Like
it
was not. It absolutely was not.
So that's the issue that I was kind of I don't know if
It's like,
good,
this.
bad.
It's bad. To think like, here, listen.
You know what I mean?
You know the companions. Why did they have this position and why did they have this status? Because we knew they were sincere. Because Allah said they were sincere. Saying that, were there not hypocrites who lived amongst them? Right? People who heard the Prophet ﷺ reciting, people who shook his blessed hand, people who gave him money, people who fought alongside him, people who prayed behind him, people who broke their fast with him. Just imagine, right? These are the people, like these are amongst him. So you're telling me bad things didn't happen? Silly. Like it's inconceivable. You have people like, okay, yeah, they were sincere, but they made mistakes. A man came to the Prophet ﷺ, he said, halakt. He's like, man, I've been destroyed. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, what happened? He said, man, I went to my wife during the day in Ramadan. People make mistakes. People commit sin, whether they be a companion or not. Like, was it a better time? Absolutely. Why? You know why it was better? Because the Prophet ﷺ was alive. That's why. Salawatullahi wassalamu alayhi. It was better because, yes, their companions were there and they were righteous, and there's no doubt about that. Nobody doubts their intention, but it doesn't mean bad things didn't happen. It's a completely warped worldview. And they dealt with it. How did they deal with it? They dealt with it in a meaningful way. Again, transparent. What are the punishments? What is the accountability? What's going to happen? Everybody knew what it was. And like we have to do the same. And if we can create those standards within ourselves, what do we do? You know what? We're out of theory now. If I can go home just from this discussion today and be like, okay, hey, these are some of the things I need to put into place. You know what I've done? I've successfully prevented myself from falling into evil. Or at least created barriers that would minimize that. So I think it is possible. I think it is being done. I think that when things go on social media, it just becomes louder. I don't think social media is inherently evil. Like I use it a lot. I think there are a lot of good in it. I think it magnifies everything. Does that make sense? Right? So if something is bad, it gets really magnified. And if something is good, it gets really magnified. But people tend to look less at the good stuff, right? No, nobody wants to hear about puppies being saved, right? People would rather look at the scandal. It's just, you know what I mean? It's human nature. It's human nature. You know what I mean? It's like wanting to see the accident, but not, you know what I mean? Not watching the person who's helping the old lady cross the street, right? I think it's just a natural thing. We like seeing disaster is much more attractive, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's why Trump is bad. I'm
Huh?
sorry, that's what it is.
But I'm sorry, what was the disaster?
Sorry, that was a joke.
I was waiting for the disaster. But anyway. Okay, but we'll stop here, inshallah. We'll continue the discussion next week. وجزاكم الله خير والله أعلم وصلى الله على خير خلق نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.